The next day at the office, Dapo and Lola found themselves in yet another heated argument during a meeting. Adewale had tasked them with finalizing a major proposal, but their differing opinions led to a public clash. "This is a terrible idea," Dapo said, tossing the proposal onto the table. "It's a solid strategy," Lola countered. "You'd see that if you actually read the document instead of skimming it." Dapo leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Just because you think it's good doesn't make it gospel, Lola. And just because you're too lazy to contribute doesn't mean you get to criticize," she fired back. The tension in the room was thick as their colleagues avoided making eye contact. Finally, Adewale intervened. "Enough," he said firmly. "If you two can't work together, you'll be removed from this project. Is that what you want?" Both fell silent, their mutual glares speaking volumes. After the meeting, Lola cornered Dapo in the hallway. "You're impossible," she hissed. "And you're exhausting," he shot back. But there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, something that made Lola hesitate. Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving her confused and frustrated. That night, Dapo came home earlier than usual. Lola was in the sitting room, reviewing documents, when he walked in and dropped onto the couch across from her. "You're working again?" he asked, his tone surprisingly neutral. "What do you care?" she replied without looking up. "Maybe I don't," he said, smirking. But then his expression softened. "Look, about today. I might have been a little out of line." Lola looked up, startled. "Is that an apology?" "Don't push it," Dapo said, but his tone was lighter. She couldn't help but laugh, shaking her head. "You're unbelievable." For the first time, the tension between them seemed to ease. They talked, really talked, for the first time, and Lola was surprised to find that Dapo, beneath his arrogance, was funny and even a little charming. The peace was short-lived. A few days later, Lola overheard a conversation between Dapo and one of his friends. "She's not as bad as I thought," Dapo said, his voice carrying through the hallway. "But don't get it twisted, this isn't me going soft." Lola felt her heart drop. She stormed into the room, her eyes blazing. "So, I'm not as bad as you thought," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Dapo looked startled, then defensive. "It was a joke, Lola. Don't take everything so seriously." "A joke," she snapped. "You're unbelievable, Dapo. Just when I think you might have a shred of decency." "Maybe if you weren't so uptight, you'd get it," he interrupted, his frustration bubbling over. The argument that followed was explosive, with both of them saying things they didn't mean. By the end of it, Lola was storming upstairs, and Dapo was left alone, feeling a pang of regret he couldn't quite explain. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of heightened tension, unspoken emotions, and moments of chaos that seemed to unravel whatever fragile truths Dapo and Lola had started to build. Adewale, though observant, had learned to let their battles play out, hoping that their clashes would eventually lead to a breakthrough. But the pressure between them had reached a boiling point, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The morning started like any other, with Dapo arriving late to the office, his tie undone and his attitude as casual as ever. Lola was already in the boardroom, presenting a detailed pitch to the team for a new marketing strategy. Dapo walked in mid-presentation, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. He casually leaned against the wall, sipping a cup of coffee as if he hadn't just disrupted the meeting. "Nice of you to join us," Lola said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Don't mind me," Dapo replied with a smirk. "I'm just here to observe." Lola's frustration bubbled over. "Maybe if you showed up on time, you'd have more than just observations to contribute." The room fell silent as their argument escalated in front of the stunned team. "You think you're so perfect, don't you?" Dapo shot back. always trying to play the hero. And you think the world owes you something, Lola retorted, her voice rising. Newsflash, Dapo, it doesn't. Adewale walked in just as the tension hit its peak. What is going on here? He demanded. Neither Dapo nor Lola answered, their glares locked on each other. In my office. Now, Adewale ordered. Once inside, Adewale closed the door and turned to them, his expression a mix of anger and disappointment. You two are tearing this company apart, he said bluntly. If you can't work together, you're both out. No exceptions. Maybe that's for the best, Dapo muttered, crossing his arms. Lola's eyes widened. You're willing to throw away everything your father built because you can't handle being an adult. Stop it. Adewale yelled, slamming his hand on the desk. This isn't just about you. It's about the legacy I've spent my life building. And if you can't see that, then maybe I made a mistake trusting either of you. The room went silent, and for the first time, both Dapo and Lola looked genuinely ashamed. Later that evening, Dapo brought another woman home, a blatant act of defiance after the day's events. Lola, who had been in the sitting room reviewing documents, felt her patience snap. This has to stop, she said, standing up as the woman draped herself over Dapo. Dapo smirked, clearly enjoying her reaction. Jealous again, Lola. Get her out of here, Lola said firmly. The woman looked confused. Who does she think she is? I'm the one who has to deal with his mess every day, Lola said, glaring at Dapo. And I'm not putting up with it anymore. Dapo's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of anger. You don't get to control my life. And you don't get to treat this house like a playground, Lola shot back. The arguments grew louder until the woman stormed out, muttering under her breath. Happy now? Dapo asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. No, Lola replied, her voice trembling with frustration. I'm tired, Dapo. Tired of cleaning up after you, tired of fighting with you. She stopped, unable to finish her sentence. For the first time, Dapo saw something other than anger in her eyes, something vulnerable. And it unnerved him. That night, Dapo found himself knocking on Lola's door. When she opened it, her expression was a mix of surprise and irritation. What now? She asked, clearly exhausted. Dapo hesitated, running a hand through his hair. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For earlier. Lola blinked, taken aback. You're apologizing. Don't make it weird, he said with a half-smile. She sighed, stepping aside to let him in. Why are you really here, Dapo? He hesitated before speaking. I don't know. I guess, I'm just tired too. For the first time, they talked without the usual sarcasm or hostility. Dapo admitted to feeling lost, burdened by the expectations placed on him. Lola, in turn, confessed how difficult it was to navigate her role in the family. By the time Dapo left, something had shifted between them. Neither could quite explain it, but the walls they had built around themselves were beginning to crack. The next morning, Adewale called them into his study. He looked pale, his usual commanding presence diminished. I've made a decision, he began, his voice strained. It's time for me to step back from the company. Dapo and Lola exchanged shocked looks. What are you saying, Dad? Dapo asked. I'm saying that it's time for you two to take over, Adewale said. Together. The announcement left them reeling, but there was no time to argue. A storm was brewing within the company, and they would have to face it as a united front, or risk losing everything. The announcement of Adewale's retirement party sent ripples through the company and the family. For years, the CEO had been a towering figure of authority and guidance, and his decision to step down marked the end of an era. The party was grand, a mix of business associates, family friends, and staff all gathered to celebrate Adewale's legacy. Dapo arrived fashionably late, as always, with a glamorous woman on his arm. Her presence immediately drew attention, and whispers filled the room. Lola, standing by Adewale's side, felt her stomach tighten at the sight. She forced a smile, trying to focus on her role as the supportive wife, but her eyes kept drifting to Dapo. Lola looked stunning in a fitted emerald green gown that hugged her figure perfectly, drawing several admiring glances from the guests. Adewale, ever the doting husband in public, stayed close to her, introducing her to various influential guests. Dapo, meanwhile, moved through the crowd with his usual charm, but his focus repeatedly returned to Lola. He caught her eye more than once, and each glance felt like a spark, igniting something neither of them could control. Lola tried to focus on Adewale's words as he introduced her to a prominent investor, but her attention kept straying. She watched as Dapo laughed at something his date said, jealousy simmering beneath her composed exterior. Later in the evening, Lola found herself alone on the balcony, needing a moment to collect herself. She leaned against the railing, taking deep breaths to steady her nerves. Running away from the crowd. Dapo's voice broke the silence. She turned to see him standing in the doorway, his tie slightly loosened and a drink in his hand. Just needed some air, she replied, her voice calm but guarded. Dapo stepped closer, his gaze locked on hers. You look beautiful tonight, he said, his tone sincere. Lola's cheeks flushed. Don't start, Dapo. I'm not starting anything, he said, setting his drink on the railing. I'm just saying what's true. The tension between them was palpable. Lola tried to step away, but Dapo reached out, gently grabbing her wrist. Why do we keep doing this? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know, he admitted. But I can't stop. Before either of them could think, their lips met in a kiss that was as passionate as it was forbidden. The world around them faded, and for a brief moment, nothing else mattered. When they finally broke apart, reality came crashing back. This can't happen, Lola said, her voice shaky. I know, Dapo interrupted, stepping back. It won't happen again. But the look in his eyes said otherwise. The days following the party were filled with confusion and longing. Dapo, unable to stay under the same roof as Lola without risking further indiscretions, decided to move into his own apartment. However, their connection only grew stronger. At home, in the days before Dapo officially moved out, their stolen moments became more frequent. A brush of hands in the kitchen, lingering looks in the sitting room, and quiet conversations late at night. The tension between them was electric, and their attempts to suppress it only made it stronger. At work, the office, once a battleground, became a place of subtle intimacy. They would find excuses to work late, sharing quiet dinners in the boardroom. Dapo's usual arrogance softened around Lola, and she found herself laughing at his jokes more often than she wanted to admit. At a restaurant, during lunch one day, Dapo invited Lola to a quiet restaurant under the guise of discussing a project. The conversation quickly turned personal, and by the end of the meal, they were holding hands across the table. At the amusement park, in a rare moment of spontaneity, Dapo convinced Lola to join him at an amusement park. They laughed like teenagers as they rode roller coasters and played games. The day ended with them sharing a quiet moment on the Ferris wheel, the city lights stretching out beneath them. At the cinema, one evening, Dapo surprised Lola with tickets to a romantic movie. They sat in the back row, their hands brushing against each other in the dark. By the end of the movie, they were leaning into each other, sharing whispered comments and soft laughter. In the car, driving back from a late meeting, Dapo reached over and intertwined his fingers with Lola's. The gesture was simple but deeply intimate, leaving both of them feeling vulnerable yet comforted. While Adewale never caught them in the act, he couldn't ignore the changes in their behavior. Lola's happiness was impossible to miss, and Dapo's attitude had shifted as well. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Adewale turned to Lola. "You seem lighter these days," he said, his tone curious. Lola forced a smile. "Just trying to focus on the positives." Adewale nodded but remained unconvinced. There was something in the air, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. As the bond between Lola and Dapo deepened, they both knew they were walking a dangerous line. Their connection, though undeniable, was forbidden, and the consequences of their actions loomed large. The tension in the household had reached new heights. Lola and Dapo's secret bond, which had been growing stronger by the day, was beginning to affect everything around them. The house was no longer a peaceful sanctuary. Instead, it was charged with unspoken words, stolen glances, and fleeting moments of intense connection. They knew what they were doing was dangerous, but neither could seem to stop themselves. Adewale, though outwardly content in his retirement, could sense that something was off. He had always been keenly aware of the dynamics within his family, and the subtle changes in Lola and Dapo's behavior did not escape him. There were moments when he would catch them exchanging quiet smiles or notice their sudden silences when he walked into a room. One afternoon, he called Lola into his study. "Lola, we need to talk," he said, closing the door behind her. Lola, who had been trying to maintain a sense of normalcy, felt her heart skip a beat. She sat down across from him, trying to keep her composure. "What is it, Adewale?" she asked, her voice steady. Adewale studied her for a long moment before speaking. "I know you and Dapo have been getting closer lately." Lola's breath caught in her throat. She fought to keep her expression neutral. "What do you mean?" "I'm not blind, Lola," he said, his voice soft but firm. "There's a change in the air. The way you two look at each other." He paused, taking a deep breath. "What's going on?" Lola swallowed hard. She had never imagined that Adewale would notice, much less confront her about it. For a moment, she thought about lying, about telling him everything was fine. But something in her chest twisted, and the weight of their secret felt unbearable. "I don't know what you mean," she finally said, but even she didn't believe her own words. Adewale's eyes softened. "Lola, I've watched you for years. I know you. But something is different. Please, don't lie to me." Lola's mind raced, but she couldn't find the words to explain. The truth was too complicated, too dangerous. So, she said nothing, allowing the silence to fill the room. Adewale sighed deeply, a mixture of concern and resignation in his eyes. "If this is what I think it is," he trailed off, shaking his head. "Please, don't make a mistake that will destroy everything." Lola couldn't answer. She simply stood, walked to the door, and left. Later that day, Dapo met Lola in the garden. They had been avoiding each other all morning, their guilt and confusion thick in the air between them. But the pull between them was too strong to resist for long. Dapo was sitting on the garden bench, staring out into the well-maintained lawn, his fingers nervously tapping against the armrest. When he saw Lola approaching, he stood up, his eyes locking with hers. "You didn't tell him, did you?" he asked quietly. Lola shook her head, not trusting her voice to speak. "Good," Dapo replied, his tone more serious than usual. "But, Lola, we can't keep doing this. It's dangerous. For both of us." Lola nodded, her heart aching. "I know. But I don't know how to stop it." They stood there for a long moment, neither speaking. The weight of their feelings hung in the air, suffocating them both. Finally, Dapo reached out, his hand brushing hers in a gesture of comfort. "We'll figure this out," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The office, once a place of professional collaboration, had become another battleground. The tension between Dapo and Lola had started to affect their work. Their arguments, though subtle, were increasingly frequent, and their once-efficient partnership now felt strained. They exchanged curt words in meetings, their business dealings tainted by the growing emotional turmoil between them. One afternoon, they were called into a strategy meeting to discuss a new partnership proposal. Dapo had been distant all day, and Lola could feel the coldness in the air between them. "You're not listening, Dapo," Lola said sharply, her patience wearing thin. "This is not just about you. It's about the company's future." "I know what it's about, Lola," Dapo replied, his voice clipped. "But maybe you should stop pretending like you're the only one who knows what's best for everyone." The room fell silent. Everyone in the meeting was well aware of the tension between the two, but no one dared to speak up. Lola clenched her fist, trying to remain calm. "Fine," she said, her voice low but firm. "If you think you can handle it on your own, then go ahead. But don't come crying to me when this falls apart." She stood and walked out of the room, leaving Dapo to stew in his anger. That evening, Lola found herself sitting alone in the sitting room, her mind racing with the events of the day. She couldn't stop thinking about the way Dapo had looked at her earlier, his eyes filled with frustration and longing. The moments they shared, small touches, quiet glances, were becoming impossible to ignore. She was startled from her thoughts when Dapo entered the room, his face expressionless. He walked past her without a word, but she could feel his presence like a physical weight in the room. "Dapo," she began, her voice softer than before. He stopped, his back to her. "What is it, Lola?" Lola stood, her feet moving almost of their own accord as she approached him. She didn't know what she was doing, or why she was doing it. All she knew was that the space between them was unbearable. Without a word, she reached out and touched his arm. The electric shock that passed between them was undeniable. "I can't do this anymore," Lola whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Dapo turned slowly, his eyes dark with desire and frustration. "Then don't," he said, his voice hoarse. In a single movement, he pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply. For a moment, the world fell away. There was no family, no secrets, no consequences, only them. The kiss broke their fragile resolve. They knew they had crossed a line, but in that moment, they couldn't stop themselves. They stood there in the quiet of the living room, the weight of their actions hanging over them like a dark cloud. Dapo pulled away first, his chest heaving. "We are playing with fire, Lola," he said softly. "I know," she whispered. "But I don't know how to stop." The reality of what they had just done began to sink in. They were walking a dangerous path, and they both knew that sooner or later, their secret would be exposed. But for now, all they could do was wait for the storm to break. The days that followed the kiss in the sitting room were filled with an uncomfortable silence. Both Dapo and Lola knew they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Their connection had evolved into something undeniable, and no matter how much they tried to suppress it, the bond between them continued to grow stronger. The weight of their secret pressed down on them with each passing moment. They had managed to keep their affair under wraps, but it was only a matter of time before someone would notice. The tension between them was palpable, and even Adewale could sense the unease that lingered in the house. Adewale had always been a man of few words, preferring to observe the dynamics of his family rather than confront them head-on. But over the past few weeks, he had grown increasingly unsettled by the strange behavior he had witnessed between Lola and Dapo. Their conversations had become more strained, their interactions colder yet more intense, and he could see the change in the air whenever they were in the same room. One afternoon, Adewale asked Dapo to meet him in his study. Dapo, looking slightly agitated, entered the room, closing the door behind him. "You wanted to talk?" Dapo asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. Adewale studied his son for a long moment. "Dapo, something is off." You and Lola, he trailed off, not wanting to outright accuse him, but his eyes betrayed his concern. Dapo shifted uncomfortably under his father's gaze. What do you mean? Adewale sighed, sitting back in his chair. I don't know what's going on between you two, but I can feel it. I can see it. This tension, this connection. It's not normal. Dapo's heart raced. He had feared this moment would come. His father, always perceptive, was finally starting to put the pieces together. But he couldn't tell him the truth. Not yet. It's nothing, Dad, Dapo said quickly, his voice a little too sharp. I don't know what you think you're seeing, but it's not what you think. Adewale raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. I hope you're right, Dapo. I really do. But don't make the same mistakes I made. Don't let anything come between this family. Dapo nodded stiffly, his throat tight. He couldn't bring himself to respond, the weight of his father's words hanging over him. As he left the study, Dapo couldn't help but wonder if his father had figured it out. His anxiety grew with each passing day, and he knew the time was coming when the truth would have to be revealed. At home, the atmosphere between Dapo and Lola was strained. Their stolen moments had become fewer, the guilt they felt overwhelming. The tension between them had begun to bleed into every aspect of their lives, at work, at home, even during their brief encounters outside. Despite this, their emotional connection remained undeniable. Every time they were in the same room, their eyes would meet, and the unspoken understanding between them would flare to life. It was as if their hearts were drawn to each other, regardless of the consequences.